Always, let's bring in combat veteran and retired U.S. Navy intelligence collections operator, MSNBC counterterrorism analyst Malcolm Nance. He's the author of the new book entitled The Plot to Betray America: How Team Trump Embraced Our Enemies, Compromised Our Security, and How We Can Fix It. Malcolm, congratulations on the book. It's great to see you. You have really been out front before most people were on Russia's attempts to interfere in the 2016 election. We all know so much about it now because of the Mueller report and the focus. But what did you see back then when you would come on shows like this and try to throw up the flair about it that the rest of us didn't know?
Well, you recall the first notice I gave was on July 26th from Philadelphia's Independence Hall, where I came on air and I saw what was unfolding before the whole nation. And I said, the United States is under attack, and a wide-ranging information warfare attack, a political attack designed to make Donald Trump president. And it would take about a year before anyone would really understand that. In fact, I wrote a book 6 weeks before the election, and virtually everything that happened. And there's a reason for that. I'm not a journalist. I'm a former intelligence operator. So we see things differently. We can predict activities that must be in place for an event to occur. So if you hack the DNC and you use Russian military intelligence, you're trying to replicate Watergate. And at that time, the nominee was Donald Trump. He was very close to Russia. Therefore, he was being supported by Russia and expected to benefit from Russia's efforts. All of that would be validated in the Mueller report and all subsequent reports.
So without giving up sources and methods, what did you see way back then that so many others didn't see?
Well, you know, the funny thing is I had written a book prior to that called Hacking ISIS. And in Hacking ISIS, we were going through all of ISIS's cyber operations. But there were two, one hacking of TV5, one of the major channels in Paris, and the other hacking the Warsaw Stock Exchange in Poland that looked like ISIS, but were in fact Russian military intelligence. Fancy Bear, ATP-28, ATP-29, Russian intelligence. When we saw that, we said, oh, look, the Russians are out doing these false flag operations. But when I first heard the DNC was hacked, right, the capability of that hacking required a state actor. And the only other state that would do that would be China, North Korea, or Russia. And then when CrowdStrike announced that it was ATP-28 and ATP-29, Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear, it was very obvious. Russia was trying to do Watergate. And we had already seen dozens of attempts of Russian military intelligence to hack the White House, the Pentagon, and others. That immediately set off a chain of activities in my brain based on Russian intelligence activities I had seen in the Cold War. And it was very clear it was an attack on the nation.
Malcolm, let me ask you this question. I mean, we can focus on Donald Trump, and here we have your book, The Plot to Betray America, how Team Trump is trying to do X, Y, and Z. What is the pre-story? What is the prologue to Trump? There has to be something in the soil that makes this possible. So give us a sense of the backstory that makes all of this possible in your
Right, and I write extensively about that in the book. And in fact, it was Luke Harding at The Guardian who came out with the first indicators that Donald Trump had been under Russian intelligence surveillance for a very long time, as early as 1977 with his first wife, Ivana. And Ivana was from the Czech Republic, which at that time was Czechoslovakia. Their intelligence agency, the STB, had her communications between the United States and the Czech Republic under surveillance. And they knew an enormous amount of information about Donald Trump between 1977 and the mid-'80s. And then in the mid-'80s, Donald was starting to express an interest in building Trump Tower, Moscow. But more importantly, there were word from her family that he was trying to consider running for president against George Herbert Walker Bush, who was, of course, the former director of the CIA and the vice president of the United States. So Russia became very interested in him. They had 10 years of collection, and then they brought him to Moscow for what he wanted, which was Trump Tower. But from that moment on, an enormous dossier of information was collected on him, and more importantly, how to exploit him. And his exploit, his simple exploit, as we call it in the intelligence community, is he is avaricious to a fault. He wants money, They now, in the modern Russia, with a former KGB director as president, they have money, they know how to exploit people, they know how to manipulate people, and they know how to buy people.
And you know, when you go back in the book and you go all the way back to the 1970s, as you just said, Putin and Russia never could have dreamed in the 1980s when they were looking at him as just an asset, maybe a useful asset.
Yeah.
That he would elevate to become the president of the United States, the
Right.
best possible asset they could have. So at what point did they say, okay, this guy is a serious candidate, we need to start using him and to use information that we have to bring him in close and make sure he wins the election?
Sure. You know, and I have elements of all of that in all three books, but this book is specifically starts off about how Putin, supervillain, right, goes and focuses based on his, you know, when Putin was a baby spy in East Germany, his job was to manipulate people. It was to turn people into traitors. I sat in his office in Dresden, and you could just feel the vibe that this was a man who, while everybody else, the old KGB guys, were getting drunk, he was out meeting people and bringing those spies over to the Soviet Union. But when East Germany collapsed, he took the manuals, he took all the files of everyone that he had ever flipped and that the East Germans had flipped and brought that into the business world when it became the modern Russia. So Donald Trump in 2014, by 2014, he was making enormous quantities of money from the Russian oligarchy. But that is when he came to Russia, and it became very clear to the Russians, this man could go from a useful idiot, which he was. You know, he wasn't a communist. He just wanted to build a tower in 1988. But move from a useful idiot onto an unwitting asset where he's being used and he doesn't know it. And then by 2014, it's pretty clear that he knows it when they back Trump Tower Moscow 2.0, and then they put a set of rose-colored glasses on his face. Donald Trump sees the world only through Moscow's point of view, because he knows that is where an enormous quantity of money that he cannot access exists and will be made available to him. Is he a next step, a Russian asset, where he is aware of those activities? Robert Mueller said yes, that he was well aware that he was going to benefit from Russia. And even today, we just had that testimony on Capitol Hill, which said Donald Trump canceled a naval exercise because it would hurt Russia's feelings. Mick Mulvaney said they canceled the first Javelin shipment because of how it would look to Russia. We have subordinated our national security to Vladimir Putin, and it's been said to be the greatest intelligence operation in the history of mankind.
And you were onto this a long time ago, before most people were. The book is The Plot to Betray America: How Team Trump Embraced Our Enemies, Compromised Our Security, and How We Can Fix It. Malcolm Nance, good to see you. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Coming up next.